Hi, I'm Carmen.
And I'm Steven, and this is Vienna Past and Present,
where we walk through the gilded and sometimes not so gilded halls of Vienna's history. So it's time for Haider Part 2. If you missed the first part, you might want to go back and listen. Or don't. Who are we to tell you what to do? You do you. If you want to jump in the middle, you're in the right place.
So, to pick up where we left off, Haider had just come within reach of becoming the Austrian Chancellor, and the EU was outraged, even discussing if Austria would be kicked out of the Union, so he stepped down as leader of the FPO. In some respects, this would be his political peak, at least on the official government org chart. But he would remain the governor of Carinthia. Carmen, why is that a powerful position?
Well, it's a powerful position because there's only 9 states. And so just by the numbers alone, when there's only 9, the governors of those 9 states have a good amount of power. Carinthia historically was also always antagonistic towards Vienna, and Haider really knew how to exploit that.
Okay, so maybe there's like a clumsy US state equivalent here. Is Carinthia the Texas of Austria, or like the Saskatchewan of Austria? I'm not great at Canadian politics, but maybe something like that fits here?
I think Texas could fit. You know, it's sort of a southern state that has a very strong identity and kind of its own sense of how they want to be. I don't know about Saskatchewan. Is that like some, I don't know how Canada works.
I mean, it was a couple of years ago now, but I kept hearing that was this, the most conservative part of Canada that voted very differently from, the coasts and like what we think of Canadian politics. But I don't know, things change a lot. Maybe that is like way out of date now.
Okay, but that would be, if that's the case, that's a good,
I think,
description of what Carinthia is. Yeah, conservative in the south and kind of has its own particular identity.
Okay, so while you're at it, can you tell us a bit about Carinthia now? It's Haider's home and where he is currently headed back to in this part of our story. South of Vienna, like you said, that's about all that I know personally, besides what you just said just now.
Okay, yeah. Haider's home, I'm not totally sure. It is the state that is mostly associated with Haider, but he is in fact from Upper Austria originally.
Oh, right, okay.
Right, although Carinthia is most associated with him because that's kind of where he had his political career. But yeah, to give a bit of background on Carinthia, it is the southernmost state of Austria. It borders on Italy and Slovenia in the south. It's super scenic. It's very beautiful. You have lots of mountains, lots of lakes. It's a really popular vacation spot. And I have to say, I think it is one of the prettier Austrian states.
Okay.
But we do always say you have to kind of separate the place from the people because the people are an interesting crowd. Also, I have to say maybe up front that I'm from the neighboring state, which is Styria, and there's kind of an ongoing rivalry between Styria and Carinthia, so...
Okay, that's interesting color. Nice.
Yeah. But historically, Carinthia was always sort of this border between the Germanic, Slavic, and Italian cultures. It's sort of in that little corner. And so they always had this bit of like a periphery or like border mentality, not really loyal to any of these things. They sort of had their own identity, and I'm talking really from like 1,000 years ago, that they were sort of always in between these different cultures.
Okay.
They also have very long been antagonistic towards Vienna. In part, that's because they are more Protestant than other parts of Austria. So historically, they were actually overwhelmingly Protestant. But then in the 1700s, under Maria Theresia, there was this real push towards Catholicism, and a lot of them were forced to convert to Catholicism. But that really strengthened also the sort of resistance towards Vienna and this sense of being forced to do things that they didn't want to do. And so there's kind of a long history of Carinthians not being super compliant with what the rest of the federal government would want them to do.
Okay, interesting. I don't think of Austria as this place that had a lot of like Reformation and that kind of action, at least like within Austria itself. Okay. Interesting to hear that.
Yeah, it's much less than in Germany or places like that. But yeah, Carinthia had and continues to have, I think, something like 10% of Carinthia, 10% of the population is Protestant, which is much higher than the rest of Austria.
All right.
So mega fast forward, I would say the other kind of more relevant part of the history for now is in 1918. Of course, you have the monarchy collapsing. And there was a vote about whether Carinthia should stay in Austria or not. And so the vote was in 1920, and it took 2 years of disputes and clashes before there even was a vote about it.
Wow. Okay. I guess I remember reading about votes like these where like the people got to choose which country they'd be a part of. That just sounds like such a wild time, considering like there had just been a war. And I mean, what was the literacy really like? And you think about stuff like that at that time and just how, you might wake up in some other country one day. Okay.
I know.
Crazy.
It's so weird. That whole time must have been so strange when the monarchy collapsed and suddenly you have to figure out what borders are going to be and who belongs where. And then, in some cases, there were these referendums or these votes, which, how do you even vote? I don't really know how you even vote on that.
Yeah, would love to see who was monitoring that, right? Boy.
I mean, interestingly, the westernmost state of Austria, which is Vorarlberg, they actually voted to join Switzerland. And Switzerland was like, no, we don't want you. And so they ended up with Austria. So there's some really weird little stories.
Total mess. Okay.
So yeah.
Right.
I think it was a very messy time. In any case, Carinthia, there was like this 2-year fight and debate and whatever about it. At the end of the day, they did vote to join Austria by, I think, 59% of the vote. But you still had this quite kind of divided population because you have a Slovenian-speaking population in Carinthia that wanted to join the kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, which later became Yugoslavia, and the German speakers wanted to be part of the Republic of Austria. So that was kind of the main debate that was going on for these 2 years until it was then settled in 1920. But still, you have this mixed Austrian and Slovene population. So it's a predominantly German-speaking population today, but you have a significant Slovenian minority, and that does really kind of define the state. It is very countryside. There's not really very much industry, but the people are kind of very proud, and they have this long history of, sort of being always in conflict with somebody, to be honest. That's one thing that people say about the Carinthians. It's like, if they're not against the Viennese, then they're against the Styrians, or the Slovenians, or just Austria in general. Like, they're always against somebody.
Okay, that's, I don't know, it sounds a little bit fun. Dare I say that in a Haider episode, but okay, Carinthia, I'm a little more curious now.
It is a gorgeous place. And we do also say the mountain range that's between Styria and Carinthia, which is called the Pack, is the border between genius and madness. And of course, we Styrians are on the genius side of things, according to us.
I like some little local country digs at the neighbors. I'm always here for that.
Yes. So, obviously, the Styrian side is genius, and the Carinthians are mad.
Okay, your allegiance is clear. Great.
There's only one correct allegiance, I have to say. It just is what it is. But in any case, maybe to get back to Haider briefly, some of the political slogans that he used in Carinthia, which will sound kind of familiar maybe to people also today in terms of, general political slogans that are out there. But some of his main slogans that he used were Wir gegen die in Wien, which means us against them in Vienna. And then he kind of morphed that into Sie sind gegen ihn, weil für euch ist, which means they are against him because he's for you. So he really used kind of us versus them rhetoric, it's Carinthia versus Vienna. The rest of Austria is somehow against us. He exploited that quite a lot. And that worked really well in a state like this. I mean, the Carinthians were anyway already sort of, as I said, not super Vienna friendly. And he used that to his advantage.
Okay. Yeah, that's very interesting. He sounds like a great fit kind of for that already existing culture. All right. Wow.
He really knew how to use it to his advantage. And it's kind of interesting because, like I said before, he actually was not from Carinthia originally. He was from Upper Austria, but he really, I think, understood how Carinthia worked, and he managed to really position himself in a way that worked well there.
Right. And I'm like, doing research for this, I had already forgotten that, right? Like we just said earlier, I was like, okay, he's from Carinthia, right? I'm like, oh, shoot, no. All right.
It's really easy to forget because he's so associated with Carinthia.
Yeah.
But anyway, as much as he really railed against Vienna in his local campaigning and, had this us versus them rhetoric, he did actually have ambitions of national leadership, which, as we mentioned at the top of the episode, he failed in because although he led the party to victory, he was considered too toxic to be the chancellor. And so he had to step back from the FPÖ party leadership. So he kind of had this, small potential attempt at national glory.
Yeah, he got so close.
He did get very close.
Right? I mean, sort of.
Yeah. But he didn't quite make it. And so then he returned to Carinthia as the governor. And then during this time, or in the next years, the FPÖ had some major internal chaos. Lots of people resigned. There were new elections, and they lost a lot of votes and a lot of seats. And then Haider during this time demanded to be the leader of the party again, but he was refused. And then there was a bunch of more drama, which we're not going to get into. It's very confusing, but long story short, Haider basically was bitter about what happened, and he ended up forming his own party, which was called the BZÖ, or the BZO, which never really won very many votes except for in local Corinthian elections, where it was on the upswing for a few years.
And yeah, that was tense there. That's a little clue now to what's coming. All of this came to a shocking end on October 11th, 2008, when Haider drove his car off the road at over 140 kilometers an hour while he was heavily intoxicated after a night out at a bar, quote, usually frequented by gay men. So, according to the Telegraph, it was revealed that Haider was drinking in a gay bar with a male escort before he crashed his VW Phaeton while speeding under the influence of alcohol. We'll circle back to that in a little bit.
Phaeton? That's how it's pronounced?
I think Phaeton.
Oh, that makes, yeah, okay, that makes it sound fancier than I thought it would be.
Oh, what did you think it was?
I don't know. Phaeton? I don't know. You just made it sound better.
That's a little more crouton. You're right. I think Phaeton. I mean, that's what I've heard, but I don't know where I would have heard that. So
I think just in combination with VW, I'm like, Phaeton sounds so nice, right? Like it's a Bentley or something.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm with you. I mean, I think it...
And then VW is like so basic.
Yeah,
like,
it's,
okay.
Right. We're saying it's a little more rabbit vibes for VW. But anyway, at the time of the crash, Haider's car was traveling more than twice the legal speed limit. Haider's blood alcohol level at the time of the crash was more than 3 times the legal limit of 0.5 in Austria. This fact was noted by both Haider's spokesman and the state prosecutor, so there's really no dispute there. And there are some disputes coming later, so I'm kind of calling this out. Like, this part was not, under dispute. And there were just lots of conspiracy theories around his death at this time, including him being killed by Mossad. With his family history alone that we covered in the last episode, maybe they would be paying attention to him, so this one doesn't seem like completely out of nowhere, but a little far-fetched maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, this one's not totally implausible, I guess, just on the face of it.
Yeah. Another person who questioned it was his widow Claudia. In a German newspaper, she said, the accident distance is too short to accelerate to up over 140 kilometers per hour. It was confirmed by the medical side, quote-unquote medical side, that he, Haider, had been completely sober until midnight. What, is my husband supposed to have drunk so much alcohol in just an hour? So I don't,
How
I can't
does
really
this
help.
work?
Yeah, I can't help anyone make sense of that kind of logic here, but hey, she doubted it. She said it in the paper. The doubts were out there. I guess.
I get that she doubted it, but how do you confirm that somebody was sober until midnight? After the fact?
I look at this, and I'm like, maybe there's some translation error, but I think I gave you the original, and you had the same conclusion in German.
No, yeah, I think I read the original quote, and I think she did say that. It just doesn't make any sense. I mean,
so maybe there's
don't after the fact.
Maybe someone who does autopsies is listening and can write in and inform us here. But yeah, so there were questions about it. Circling back to the rumors of homosexuality, basically it was an open secret that he was gay, but he always denied it. Is my conclusion, I guess. His wife Claudia denied this as well, saying after his death that if there had been any truth to the rumors, I would have divorced. And she supposedly resented this interpretation of his life after his death. She didn't just gloss over it. She really did address it kind of head on.
I get it, right? She's trying to protect her reputation and his legacy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't personally think there's a lot of questions about whether he was gay or not, but I get that she denied it.
Yeah, and whatever, all of his politics and everything aside, it's it's hard to, lose your husband and then face these kind of complicated, sort of difficult to deny, I think, accusations right after his death. So yeah, who knows what.
Yeah, and I think they had 2 kids or something as well, and it makes sense that she would just deny it and claim it wasn't true.
Right, but there were a few more characters involved here. There's someone named Stefan Petzner, who was just 27 at the time. He took over the BZO party leadership after Haider's death. Again, the BZO was that party that Haider created when the FBO then broke up, the new one that he made, the last party that he was in before his death. He said in interviews in the days after that, quote, We had a special relationship that went far beyond friendship. Jörg and I were connected by something truly special. He was the man of my life. So it's said that the party tried to ban other interviews that Stefan had planned after he said that. So like they were kind of doing damage control. It sounded like there was more banning than like refuting.
Yeah, trying to just manage the message, right?
Yeah, I think some interesting color here is, I saw this New York Times article that was written at that time. Essentially, it said that in 2008, when this happened, countries around the EU were making bigger, more visible moves on marriage equality, and politicians were starting to come out, like in Spain, Germany, Belgium. The gay community in Vienna, at least, was visible, but I guess that wasn't very true in the rest of Austria at that time. The article quotes an Austrian gay rights organization saying that most people knew about Haider's secret life, but most Austrians would rather ignore it, they said. Gay rights just wasn't a vote-getting issue in the country at this time, and his supporters, on the right, had more to gain from mythologizing him as like a champion of traditions. So there just wasn't, I guess, there weren't really the right motivations, they said, to make this more exposed and make this a big part of his story by, I guess, anyone involved in Austria. I don't know what you think about that, Carmen. Like, it's kind of hard to go back in time to 2008 and tell me what it was like in the countryside, but
it's a bit hard to say.
Like, I thought that was kind of an interesting take. Like, maybe it was less that it was just somehow magically suppressed, and it was more just like, okay, no one stood anything to gain here. Or not as many people did.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's hard to say how it was in the countryside. Haider's death is one of the first things I remember after I moved to Austria, because this happened, I think, 2 weeks after I moved to Vienna.
Okay.
And it was big news. This part of the story that he was coming from a gay bar was a part of the story, but I don't remember it being hugely discussed. I don't know. I think at least in Vienna, the attitude was like, yeah, of course he was gay, and that's super not surprising. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't really, I don't know, it wasn't really a scandal. And I don't think it was much discussed in the media. And maybe, yeah, you're right. I don't think it was that much of a vote-getting issue at the time in Austria, so it just wasn't really that picked up on. It was, I think, a detail that I don't think people were super surprised by, to be honest. And yeah, either it was just ignored or uninteresting, I suppose.
Okay. And I mean, that's neither here nor there, but yeah, it's an interesting aspect of the story, even if you look back and kind of see how it was interpreted then, like, I guess, through that lens. There were also some shady connections, I guess, that became more clear after his death. Like, to me, it seems like this could be clear during his life too, but anyway, it seems to be more kind of...
I think it got more exposed after his death, right? Because he could cover it up and the party could cover it up while he was still alive. And then after he died, people started digging into all of these things, and there wasn't so much of an apparatus to stop him.
Yeah.
Or to stop them.
Yeah, so supposedly there were shady connections to Saddam Hussein and the Libyan leader Gaddafi. Let's be clear that this, seems to be speculative and unconfirmed, at least in the research that I was able to do, but, like, appearing in more than one source, for sure.
This is such a throwback. I mean, Gaddafi, that's like so 2010 for me or something.
Very.
I forgot that guy existed.
Mm-hmm.
But
There's been a lot of news since then. So a son of Gaddafi is said to have attended his funeral. He had a lot of sons, I think, but that is definitely a bit of a thinker. I don't know, I just don't think of like Libya and Austria as being BFFs at any point, but
Yeah, but, corruption goes everywhere. But yeah, no, you wouldn't think that those two would be hanging out too much.
It's not like France or something. Okay, it's not quite as logical to me.
Kind of strange bedfellows, yeah.
Then documents were supposedly found, a quote, black book written by an FPO party leader detailing visits to Iraq by Haider before the 2003 Iraq War. And money transfers were detailed in this, in the millions of dollars from Saddam's son's Swiss accounts, delivered in a briefcase at a meeting in Munich for investment purposes. So just a little bit of like a suspicious amount of detail there.
Okay. Yeah, that could connect to his banking scandal that I'm going to get into afterwards, maybe. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. Which, yes, I don't know anything about. I'm excited for that part. I'm, quote, excited. Mm. Supposedly, he received millions of euros from each of them, and that disappeared into bank accounts in Liechtenstein. He may have helped funnel dark money into Europe to support far-right politicians. Like I said, this all seems unconfirmed, but from what I've learned, it seems possible to me. Haider wasn't exactly a stickler for rules and convention. He was big into personal relationships. I don't know. It just seems possible.
Agreed. Yeah.
Anyway, we'll call this next part legacy and open questions, I guess. Looking back at what we've said in the last episode or two about this, it's like he dreamed of being chancellor or in national leadership. He failed to ever hold a national office, really, but he definitely left a lasting impact on Austrian politics. Ultimately, he was a populist, an opportunist. He spoke off the cuff. He wasn't always very polished in how he expressed himself. He just said offensive things sometimes, then was unapologetic. I just feel like this sounds familiar lately.
Oh, really? Who comes to mind?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there are parallels to Trump. I think there's parallels to Luega that we covered in an earlier episode.
I mean, to some extent, I think he was maybe also successful, aside from sort of how he expressed himself. But just because the ÖVP and the SPÖ, those two dominant post-war parties, had been in politics for such a long time and had really dominated the post-war political scene in Austria, that by the 90s, when Haider came around, there had been a lot of corruption scandals, and the slow, glacial nature of Austrian politics was just really fertile ground for a disruptor like Haider. So I think that may have also been a part of it.
Yeah, and we've covered a lot of, some opinionated pieces of his legacy and what he did, and, maybe some unconfirmed ones like these scandals, but maybe the least controversial legacy for him, it may have been that way that he helped to, end the dominance of those two big political parties after World War II.
Yeah.
I won't attempt their acronyms. Or what colors are they?
They're black and red.
Blue?
Black and red.
Damn it. Okay. Black and red.
Blue is the FPÖ, so that's the Haider party.
Oh, okay. All right.
And the BZÖ had some color too, orange or some shit. I don't know.
Okay. So, Carmen, you mentioned another lasting legacy scandal kind of thing.
Yes, I would say this is his most enduring scandal and or legacy. I don't know. Legacy sounds too positive because this was not really a very positive situation, at least not for the Austrian people.
Yeah.
This was the Hypo Adria Bank financial disaster.
Okay.
So this was a corruption scandal where, just in broad strokes, I mean, it's also a very complicated and long story, but I'm just going to give sort of the Cliff's Notes here. Mm-hmm. It was a corruption scandal where Haider guaranteed a regional bank with state finances, and that bank then handed out a bunch of credit to a lot of shady characters, especially in Eastern Europe. And there was kind of this agreement that basically Haider would use taxpayer money to, fund this bank so that they could expand into Eastern Europe. And they would then finance Haider's pet projects in Carinthia that were like absurdly expensive and just super corrupt. Like, for example, there was one event venue that was built that had 600,000 euros in operating costs per year, but only brought in 40,000 euros per year. And the bank just
Yikes.
financed that for years, even though it had a huge operating loss and was not viable at all. And unsurprisingly, as a result of these kinds of things and the fact that they handed out all this credit that was, bad credit and never paid back for all these shady projects in Eastern Europe, the bank became insolvent. And then ultimately, after a bunch of back and forth, it became nationalized. And so then Austria, the country of Austria, took over the bank, nationalized it, and they also took on a balance sheet of 17.8 billion euros that basically transferred to the national debt ratio.
Wow.
And massively increased the Austrian debt. I don't remember now, but the debt that this bank had when it was nationalized was something like 10 times the Corinthian state budget. So, I mean, it was massively in the hole. And then the Austrian state kind of took on all of that debt.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's the Austrian taxpayer that had to pay for it. And I think we're still paying for it. I'm not totally sure. I couldn't exactly find the details. But it was massively expensive for all of us for no good reason.
Right. That's... Austria is a wealthy country, but it's not that big. That's just a huge amount for one big mistake. Wow. 20 billion euros a while ago. I mean, it's more now. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive, massive
Jeez.
burden on the Austrian state. And this is, now it's a big discussion again. I mean, not directly related to this, obviously, but just the size of the Austrian debt is again now an issue because it is too big. And then you have shit like this where this bank that is doing shady stuff. Haider is the one who kind of masterminded the whole thing. And he died before most of it hit the fan, but he is the one who helped set all of this in motion. And so I would say that this is kind of the most enduring and like maybe painful legacy for Austrians as a whole, because we've all been paying this.
Wow.
We've all been paying for this for like the last 10 years.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I haven't heard of that. Interesting.
Yeah. There's a lot more to that story, but, you know, it gets very complicated. So that's the broad strokes of it.
Yeah. Okay.
And so despite all of that, there is a cult of personality that has also emerged around Haider since his death, which is a little inexplicable to me because, I don't know, all I see is that we've had to pay for his corruption. But others apparently, you know, see it very differently. So there is this cult of personality that has emerged. He kind of, I think through his death, had a bit of a martyrdom situation where the FPÖ, also his wife and his followers and kind of the people around him really kind of tried to create this legacy and this kind of mythology around him.
Yeah.
Particularly in Carinthia. And he kind of became mythologized as someone who calmed the fears of people, who heard the people, who, you know, was this fearless leader speaking out against these, like, you know, foreign, unknown dangers. And so he really used people's fears very effectively, positioned himself as their savior. And that is the myth and the legacy that has kind of been created in the aftermath of his death. And, you know, with the whole banking scandal, he was already dead by the time any of those details came out. And so, in a way, he kind of got away with it in the sense that, you know, people didn't really want to blame him, although he definitely was to blame, but he had this sort of martyrdom, you know, advantage, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's kind of true. Yeah, he doesn't, you know, he can't really be asked any of these questions, right? It's unfair to judge this dead person who died tragically, right? Like, yeah, there's a lot kind of coverage that you might get from that.
Yeah, he could never be held to account. He couldn't be asked. And then, of course, like, you shouldn't speak ill of the dead and all these kind of things that you can use to sort of steer the conversation away from that and kind of create this mythology around him.
Right.
And so the FPÖ to this day still promotes the image of an idealized Haider who was there for the Austrian people when no one else was, and they just fully ignore all the corruption and the damage that he caused, right? That's obviously not a part of the story, and it's very much about, he understood the Corinthian people, he was there for them, he was like their strong, fearless leader who said what needed to be said. And so he still remains very popular in Carinthia even today.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the topic for this episode, it came up because the FPÖ is back and Trump is back. You said that he came up in the Austrian news recently again, right?
Yeah, he did come up during the election in September, or after the election, when the FPÖ had their best result that they've ever had historically. And yeah, immediately a lot of the headlines were all about, you know, how Haider would be proud and this is Haider's legacy. Wow. Okay. And they really were tying it back very heavily to Haider because their best showing previous to this one was under his leadership. And so, yeah, he's kind of back in the headlines, in the news. And yeah, this cult of personality really persists.
Yeah, and it was interesting to me how relatively little information there was, you know, in English beyond, you know, the stories about his death, you know, sort of this high-level coverage of, like, you know, is he gay or not? So I wonder if there will be new looks at him, right? And hopefully we've kind of cobbled together something to, you know, provoke some thoughts here. I definitely learned when I was researching for this, so... Yeah, interesting character, to use the term broadly.
Yeah. It does seem like I don't know. A lot of those characters are coming back that I thought were gone.
Yeah.
Or their successors. I mean, obviously, Haider personally is not coming back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if there will be more thoughts about him in a couple years after this, or if, you know, this idea of him or new information or something will have come out.
Possibly. Yeah. The only thing that I can say that I've noticed is, I mean, I had not thought of or talked about or really heard about Haider at all, I would say, in the last couple of years. And then now in the last couple of months, I think specifically because of the election, I don't know, he's come up quite often. And either I've seen it in the news or just people who I've been talking to have kind of mentioned it. And he's a little bit more back in the discussion than he was, I'd say, 5 or 10 years ago.
Okay, another Austrian character.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's plenty I'm not too proud of. I'd put him in that bucket.
All right. On that note,
that's it for our show. Thank you for listening. And if you liked what you heard, then share with your friends or leave us a 5-star review. And if you didn't like it, then don't worry about that review.
Right. You can find us on social medias, Vienna Past and Present, Instagram, on Blue Sky even, or send us your episode ideas at viennapastandpresent@gmail.com.
Auf Wiedersehen, viert euch, Baba.
Bye.